The Rise and Fall of Mayor Tiffany Henyard, a cautionary tale in Dalton. Illinois. Tiffany Henyard's tenure as mayor of Dalton, Illinois, began with the promise of reform and transparency, but quickly devolved into a turbulent saga defined by controversy, scandal, and deepening public distrust. Elected amid high hopes, Henyard soon became a symbol of dysfunction, with her administration marred by poor decision-making, financial mismanagement, and ethical concerns that shook the foundation of local governance. Henyard's rise to power came under unusual circumstances following the sudden death of long-serving Mayor Frank Zuccarelli. With minimal public input and under intense political pressure, the Dalton Board of Trustees appointed Henyard as his replacement. Critics immediately questioned the legitimacy of the move, viewing it as a result of behind-the-scenes political maneuvering rather than a transparent or merit-based process. This initial skepticism would only grow as Henyard's term unfolded. From the outset, Henyard's leadership alienated both officials and residents. One of her first controversial decisions was hiring a criminal inspector without the board's consent, an action seen as a clear overreach and a disregard for due process. She further raised concerns by assigning Dalton police officers to her personal security detail, which many interpreted as a blatant misuse of public resources and an early indicator of self-serving governance. Despite campaigning on civic engagement and transparency, Henyard quickly abandoned these principles. Key community issues went unaddressed, including a mental health tax proposal that was widely rejected. She also appeared to ignore community feedback and dismiss concerns raised by both residents and fellow officials. Under her leadership, local government became increasingly toxic and fractured. Henyard's combative leadership style led to the abrupt firings of several key officials, including Jessica Jones and Stephanie Whitman. Many viewed these dismissals not as performance-related, but as politically motivated attempts to eliminate dissenting voices within the administration. Tensions reached a boiling point during a public dispute with Township Assessor Cass Anston, who was allegedly locked out of her office, a dramatic episode that underscored Henyard's aggressive and at times erratic approach to governance. Concerns escalated further when Sanston and a colleague discovered piles of confidential documents containing private resident information left unattended in a public hallway near Henyard's office. This serious breach of privacy not only violated basic administrative protocols, but also reinforced the public's growing perception of incompetence and negligence at City Hall as Henyard's administration spiraled further into dysfunction. Accusations of corruption gained traction. Allegations of embezzlement and misuse of public funds became increasingly widespread. Despite mounting pressure, Henyard refused to resign, instead claiming she was a victim of a coordinated political conspiracy aimed at undermining her leadership. Her denials, however, did little to calm growing public outrage. The situation escalated significantly when the FBI launched an investigation into her financial activities. This federal involvement deepened public distrust and delivered a major blow to Henyard's already faltering credibility. Approval ratings plummeted, and even her early supporters began to voice disillusionment. Among the most baffling moves of Henyard's term was the sudden and unexplained relocation of the assessor's office. Henyard justified the decision by citing excessive heat that supposedly made the original location unusable. Yet, there was no official documentation or public notice to support this claim, leading critics to label the move as another example of poor governance and questionable priorities. While Henyard insisted the change was part of a broader effort to improve services for residents, few found the explanation convincing. The relocation, carried out without transparency or community input, came to symbolize her administration's broader failures in communication and leadership. As scrutiny intensified, Henyard's behavior grew more defensive and authoritarian. Public meetings became heavily controlled. Media access was restricted, and reporters were frequently prevented from asking challenging questions. Rather than engage with the public or offer transparency, Henyard responded by accusing the media of spreading fake news and not conducting proper research. These evasive tactics only further alienated the public. Even her most vocal supporter, Trustee Keith Freeman, struggled to contain the backlash. His efforts to downplay reports, such as denying that sensitive documents had been mishandled during the assessor's office move, were widely dismissed by residents who had grown weary of administrative secrecy and spin facing unrelenting criticism. Henyard shifted her narrative from political defense to spiritual framing. She began presenting herself as a divine figure, claiming that her leadership was part of a higher calling, and that she was chosen by God to endure hardship. In public statements, she referred to her embattled tenure as a moral test, suggesting her trials were orchestrated by external forces seeking to destroy her purpose. While this rhetoric may have resonated with a small circle of supporters, most residents saw it as a deflection tactic, an attempt to spiritualize political missteps rather than take accountability. instead of addressing the town's tangible needs, such as financial stability, transparency, and improved services. Henyard's focus on personal vindication legal troubles continued to mount, weakening Henyard's already fragile position. One notable lawsuit came from a Dalton police officer who had served on her personal security team. The officer accused her of misusing city resources for private protection. An especially damning charge given the town's struggling finances. Another lawsuit was filed by Dwayne Doctor, a former maintenance manager who alleged he had been wrongfully terminated while on medical leave. The doctor claimed his firing violated his First and 14th Amendment rights. Although the administration cited insubordination and poor performance as reasons for his dismissal, the case added fuel to concerns about retaliation, abuse of power, and improper conduct within Henyard's administration, with the FBI investigation ongoing and media coverage intensifying. Henyard's political standing continued to deteriorate. Her approval ratings hit rock bottom, and the once hopeful image of a reformer was replaced by that of a polarizing and embattled figure. She became increasingly isolated, not only from the public, but also from colleagues and former allies. Even Freeman's unwavering support began to show signs of strain as calls for reform grew louder. Henyard's insistence on portraying herself as a victim of conspiracy, divine persecution, or partisan politics no longer held sway with a community focused on real-world consequences. What began as a promising chapter for Dalton ended in one of the most controversial mayoral tenures in the town's history. Henyard's leadership, defined by opaque decision-making, mismanagement, and a failure to deliver on basic responsibilities, left Dalton reeling. Her administration became a case study in how unchecked ambition, lack of transparency, and disregard for ethical standards can erode public trust. As Dalton now struggles to recover from the damage, residents are left to wonder whether the community can rebuild and reestablish a functional government that puts the people first. Henyard's political future remains uncertain. While she continues to deny wrongdoing and resist calls to resign, the growing chorus of criticism and the ongoing legal challenges suggest her grip on power may not hold. Tiffany Henyard's time in office serves as a sobering reminder of what can happen when democratic norms are undermined by ego, poor judgment, and a refusal to be held accountable. The community she once promised uplift was instead left divided and disillusioned. As Dalton moves forward, its residents and leaders must now ask how to restore trust, heal fractured relationships, and ensure that future leadership truly reflects the values of integrity, transparency, and service. Henyard's tenure may be drawing to a close, but the lessons from her administration will likely shape Dalton's political landscape for years to come. Tiffany Henyard. From reformist hope to cautionary tale in Dalton, Illinois. Tiffany Henyard's time as Mayor of Dalton, Illinois, began with the promise of reform and revitalization, but quickly unraveled into scandal, secrecy, and widespread public disillusionment. Initially heralded as a new voice for change, Henyard's administration instead became defined by dysfunction, a growing list of legal controversies, and what many came to view as authoritarian-style leadership. A critical turning point came when Henyard confronted a reporter who questioned her administration's ongoing restrictions on media access. Rather than offering transparency or clarity, Henyard accused the journalist of spreading fake news, a response that only fueled public frustration and cast further doubt on her ability to govern. The move exemplified what critics described as a growing pattern of evasion and hostility toward accountability, once viewed as a symbol of hope and progress. Henyard's tenure became synonymous with secrecy, infighting, and broken promises. Legal challenges continued to mount, each further weakening her already shaky standing and intensifying calls for her resignation. Among the most damaging allegations was a lawsuit filed by a Dalton police officer who served on Henyard's personal security detail. The suit claimed she had misused city resources for personal protection, a serious charge in light of Dalton's strained financial condition. The accusation raised broader concerns about the abuse of power and the potential misuse of taxpayer dollars. Another lawsuit, filed by former maintenance manager Dwayne Doctor, accused Henyard of wrongful termination while he was on leave. While her administration claimed Doctor was let go for insubordination, he argued the dismissal violated his First and 14th Amendment rights. These legal battles highlighted what many saw as a disturbing pattern: a leadership style that disregarded legal norms and retaliated against perceived opposition. Despite the growing number of lawsuits and scandals, Henyard insisted she was a target of politically motivated attacks. However, her claims of victimhood failed to resonate with a public that had grown weary of secrecy, evasion, and deteriorating services. Even some of her initial allies began to distance themselves, questioning whether she could ever regain the community's trust as federal authorities and the FBI deepened their investigations into Henyard's financial activities. Her grip on power appeared increasingly tenuous. What had once been a hopeful opportunity for reform now looked more like a sustained period of chaos and instability in Dalton Henyard's refusal to take responsibility and her combative approach toward local officials and the media only added to the growing sense of betrayal felt by Dalton residents. The town, which had hoped for growth and revitalization, was instead overwhelmed by financial mismanagement, legal drama, and eroded trust in its leadership. The breaking point came as federal investigators began probing deeper into Henyard's use of public funds. The findings were damning. A taxpayer-funded $26,000 trip to Las Vegas, and a broader pattern of questionable and excessive spending. These revelations were particularly galling given Dalton's precarious financial state and the daily struggles of its residents attempting to control the narrative. Henyard hired former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot at $400 an hour to conduct a review of her spending, an ironic move that only intensified public backlash. Many viewed the decision as a tone-deaf misuse of public money, especially as it was spent investigating herself as scrutiny mounted. Henyard tried to frame the investigations as racially motivated attacks against a black woman in power. While this garnered some sympathy, the defense ultimately failed to distract from the growing pile of evidence suggesting mismanagement and corruption. Most residents saw the narrative shift as a deflection tactic, not a serious engagement with the issues at hand. Henyard's absence from a key village board of trustees meeting during the height of the scandal only fueled more speculation and widened the rift between her administration and the community. She was elected to serve. The federal investigation uncovered another bombshell. Nearly $900,000 had been paid over 2 years to a local prosecutor who had not filed a single criminal charge. This staggering payment raised serious concerns that taxpayer funds were being funneled toward political allies rather than used for public benefit. The scandal expanded when subpoenas were issued to Henyard's political committee, charity, and inner circle, including trustees believed to be her relatives. Federal agents demanded access to payroll records, expense reports, travel logs, credit card transactions, and employment reimbursements. The scope of the subpoena suggested that the alleged corruption might run deep, potentially involving multiple layers of her administration. As the evidence mounted, residents were left wondering how extensive the damage truly was and whether their community could recover. Henyard, once seen as a rising political star with the potential to bring meaningful change, had instead become a cautionary tale. Her administration, once filled with promise, now appeared to be a textbook example of what happens when ambition and ego go unchecked. The disillusionment among Dalton residents was palpable. What began as hope for a brighter, more inclusive future had descended into a prolonged civic nightmare. Public trust in local government had collapsed, and ongoing legal battles threatened to consume any remaining stability in the town's political leadership. As Henyard's political career unraveled before the public eye, the community was left to grapple with a painful question. Would there be real accountability for the misuse of power and public funds? Or would the scandals fade into political memory, leaving no meaningful justice in their wake? Tiffany Henyard's legacy, one imagined as one of trailblazing leadership, had instead become a story of mismanagement, deflection, and deep civic betrayal. Her failure to deliver on promises of reform, transparency, and responsible governance has left Dalton struggling to pick up the pieces as residents look toward rebuilding. They carry with them hard-learned lessons about the importance of accountability, the dangers of unchecked authority, and the need for leadership grounded not in ego or spin, but in service. Tiffany Henyard's downfall, scandal, secrecy, and community betrayed. Tiffany Henyard's tenure as mayor of Dalton, Illinois, began with soaring rhetoric and promises of transparency, reform, and empowerment. But her time in office quickly deteriorated into a prolonged political crisis, marred by scandal, legal battles, and growing public outrage. What was once hailed as a transformative moment for the town became a cautionary tale of unchecked power, mismanagement, and a devastating erosion of public trust. Henyard's sudden rise to leadership followed the unexpected death of long-serving Mayor Frank Zuccarelli. With minimal public input, the Dalton Board of Trustees appointed Henyard to fill the position, an unconventional and controversial decision that immediately raised questions about the legitimacy and transparency of the process. Critics argue the appointment was less about merit and more about political maneuvering. Setting the tone for a fraught and divisive administration from the outset, Henyard alienated officials and constituents alike. One of her earliest decisions, hiring a criminal inspector without the board's consent, suggested a disregard for due process. She further blurred ethical boundaries by assigning Dalton police officers to serve as her personal security detail, a move many saw as an abuse of public resources. Despite campaigning on civic engagement, Henyard repeatedly ignored public concerns, including rejecting a mental health tax proposal, failing to address rising community needs, and dismissing dissenting voices. Firings of key personnel like Jessica Jones and Stephanie Whitman were seen by many as politically motivated rather than performance-based, contributing to a culture of fear and retaliation as tensions escalated. So did the scandals. Township Assessor Cass Sandstone was allegedly locked out of her office amid a heated dispute with Henyard. Soon after, confidential documents containing sensitive resident information were found left unattended outside the mayor's office. An egregious breach of privacy that highlighted the administration's incompetence and disregard for protocol among the most high-profile legal battles was a lawsuit filed by a Dalton police officer who accused Henyard of misusing public funds by assigning officers to serve as her private security, an especially damning allegation amid the town's ongoing budget shortfalls. Another lawsuit came from Dwayne Doctor, a former maintenance manager who claimed wrongful termination and alleged violations of his First and 14th Amendment rights. The doctor asserted he was fired while on approved leave, painting a troubling picture of an administration that punished dissent with terminations and legal intimidation. These lawsuits reinforce a perception that Henyard's leadership had fostered a toxic political climate where loyalty was rewarded and opposition silenced. As local outrage grew, federal investigators launched a probe into Henyard's financial activities. The results were alarming. A $26,000 taxpayer-funded trip to Las Vegas, luxury hotel stays, and high-end meals revealed a pattern of lavish and inappropriate spending at the community's expense. These revelations came at a time when Dalton's financial situation was dire, and many residents were struggling to access basic services in a tone-deaf attempt to control the narrative. Henyard hired former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot at a rate of $400 an hour to conduct an independent investigation into her spending, an act widely seen as self-serving and wasteful. Meanwhile, Henyard deflected criticism by framing the investigations as racially motivated attacks against a black woman in power. While this defense resonated with a few supporters, many residents viewed it as a cynical distraction from mounting evidence of mismanagement. Her absence from a critical village board of trustees meeting during the height of the scandal only widened the disconnect between Henyard and her constituents. Instead of offering answers or accountability, she remained defiant and evasive as federal authorities continued to dig. More disturbing fact emerged. Nearly $900,000 had been paid over 2 years to a local prosecutor who had not filed a single criminal charge, raising serious concerns about cronyism and the misuse of public funds. The scope of the investigation widened to include Henyard's deputy police chief, political committee, nonprofit charity, and several trustees, 2 of whom were reportedly her relatives. Federal subpoenas demanded access to payroll records, travel expenses, reimbursement requests, and credit card statements, suggesting a systemic pattern of corruption reaching deep into the heart of Dalton's government. Adding fuel to the fire, Henyard's top aide, Keith Freeman, was also ensnared in controversy. Freeman faced allegations of bankruptcy fraud and reportedly failed to disclose village revenues, while receiving payments that exceeded budgetary limits. Despite the severity of the claims, Freeman retained powerful positions in both Dalton and nearby Thornton Township, prompting speculation about whether he might be cooperating with investigators. Former FBI agents predicted that more witnesses and informants could soon come forward, signaling that the investigation was far from over and that Henyard's inner circle was under serious scrutiny. While Dalton residents cope with deteriorating infrastructure, underfunded programs, and economic hardship, Henyard's spending habits drew further criticism. She reportedly spent more than $12,000 on travel in a single year, including first-class airfare and luxury hotel stays at properties like the Four Seasons in Atlanta and the Marriott Marquis in New York. One hotel stay allegedly cost an astonishing $133,000, a number that outraged residents and became a powerful symbol of her detachment from the town's struggles. Instead of investing in public safety, social services, or infrastructure improvements, Henyard appeared to be living lavishly on the public dime. This extravagance, coupled with efforts to suppress media access and control public meetings, only reinforced the image of a mayor more concerned with personal power than public service. As Henyard's administration spiraled into further dysfunction, pressure mounted for her to resign. Calls for her removal grew louder by the day. Community members who once championed her as a force for progress now demanded accountability and change. Federal subpoenas targeting her political and charitable organizations signaled that prosecutors were building a broader case of financial mismanagement and potential collusion. Through it all, Henyard remained defiant. She accused fellow trustees, many of whom are also black, of being shamed for attacking a black woman in power, a rhetorical strategy that only deepened the public sense of betrayal. Her reliance on identity politics, rather than addressing the evidence directly, appeared more as an attempt to distract than to engage in honest governance. Whether Henyard will face criminal charges remains unclear, but her political career has suffered irreversible damage. Once hailed as a promising reformer, she now stands as a symbol of failed leadership, broken promises, and institutional betrayal of the community she was elected to serve has been left fractured, emotionally, politically, and financially. The federal investigation into Henyard and her associates continues, and the town of Dalton is left to reckon with the fallout of her administration. With every new revelation, public trust in local government erodes. Further, Tiffany Henyard's time as mayor of Dalton will be remembered not for the progress she once promised, but for the crisis she created. Her downfall has become synonymous with scandal, controversy, and betrayal. It serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when political power is exercised without integrity, transparency, or accountability as Dalton attempts to move forward. The challenge now is not only to rebuild civic trust, but also to ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated. Whether the town can recover remains to be seen, but one thing is clear. Henyard's administration will leave a lasting, painful mark on Dalton's history, a sobering chapter defined not by leadership, but by scandal,